Don't let your mind control you, you are in control. Stoic philosophy for emotional mastery. The war inside your head. Before the alarm even stops ringing, it begins. A thought slips in, then another. A worry about yesterday, an anxiety about today. A replay of something someone said 3 days ago that you still haven't processed. A fear of what might go wrong before noon. A comparison to someone you saw online last night. A quiet, persistent whisper that you're already behind. And the day hasn't even started. Within seconds, your mind is already running at full speed. And you haven't even gotten out of bed. This is the war most people never talk about. Not a war with enemies in the outside world. Not a war fought on battlefields or boardrooms or courtrooms. But a war fought entirely within the walls of your own skull. A war waged by your own thoughts against your own peace. And for most people, they don't even realize they're losing it. We live in an age of unprecedented distraction. Notifications demanding your attention every few minutes. News cycles engineered to provoke fear and outrage. Social media platforms algorithmically designed to trigger comparison, insecurity, and compulsive scrolling. The modern world has become an expert at hijacking human attention, pulling it outward, keeping it fragmented, ensuring it never settles long enough to find stillness. But here is what's remarkable. Even before smartphones existed, even before television, before radio, before the printing press, the greatest philosophers in history already knew the truth. They already saw the battlefield. They already understood that the most dangerous and consequential war a human being can fight is not outside them. It is within. The mind, left unattended, becomes a tyrant. The ancient Stoics called the ruling faculty of the mind the hegemonikon, the command center of the soul, the place from which all decisions, interpretations, and responses originate. And they dedicated their entire lives, not just their writings, but their daily habits, their relationships, their responses to suffering and success alike, to mastering it. Because they understood what most modern people are only beginning to discover. You are not a passive victim of your thoughts. You are not simply subject to whatever emotion arises, whatever fear surfaces, whatever narrative your mind decides to generate on any given morning. You have a choice. You have always had a choice. But exercising that choice requires something most people never develop: the capacity to step back from the storm of the mind and consciously, deliberately, choose your response. Think about the people you admire most. The ones who seem unshakable in crisis. The ones who remain calm when everything around them is chaos. The ones who don't crumble under pressure, who don't explode in anger, who don't spiral into anxiety when things go wrong. What do they have that others seem to lack? It isn't the absence of difficulty. Their lives are no easier than anyone else's. It isn't the absence of emotion. They feel everything. Loss, fear, frustration, grief. The difference is that they have learned, through practice and philosophy, to be the master of their inner world rather than its servant. That is what this journey is about. The war inside your head is real, it is constant, and it is the most important war you will ever fight, because every other battle in your life will be shaped by how well you fight this one. Your relationships, your career, your health, your happiness, all of it flows from the quality of your inner life, from the stories you tell yourself, from the emotions you allow to govern your choices, from the degree to which you are truly, consciously, in command of your own mind. The Stoics didn't promise that the war would end. They promised something better, that you could become the kind of person who wins it. Not once, in a single dramatic moment of enlightenment, but daily, moment by moment, choice by choice. The battlefield is your mind. The weapon is awareness. The victory is a life lived with intention, clarity, and unshakable inner peace. And it begins the moment you decide that you, not your emotions, not your impulses, not the noise of the world around you, are the one in charge. Let's begin. What Stoicism really means. Mention Stoicism to someone who's never studied it, and they'll probably picture a stone-faced man who feels nothing, someone who suppresses grief with gritted teeth, ignores pain with cold indifference, and walks through life like a machine, productive, efficient, and completely devoid of warmth or feeling. That image couldn't be further from the truth. Stoicism is one of the most misunderstood philosophies in human history, and ironically, it may also be the most human one, the one most deeply concerned with the full complexity of the human experience, with suffering and joy, with loss and love, with the struggle to live meaningfully in a world that often seems indifferent to our well-being. The philosophy was founded in Athens around 300 BC by Zeno of Citium, and the circumstances of its founding are themselves telling. Zeno was a merchant who survived a shipwreck, lost everything, and washed up in Athens with nothing. He wandered into a bookshop, began reading philosophy, and found his calling. Stoicism wasn't born in a prestigious academic institution or among wealthy intellectuals. It was born from loss, from the wreckage of one man's former life, from the urgent practical question, how do I live well when everything has fallen apart? He began teaching in a public space, the Stoa Poikile, the painted porch, open to anyone who would listen, not just aristocrats, not just scholars, merchants, workers, slaves, ordinary people trying to make sense of their lives. From the beginning, Stoicism was a philosophy for the real world. Over the centuries that followed, it was developed and refined by some of the most remarkable human beings who ever lived. Epictetus was born a slave in the Roman Empire, a man who had, by definition, no external freedom whatsoever. His master could beat him, sell him, dictate every aspect of his physical existence, and yet Epictetus became one of the freest, most psychologically powerful people of his era. He understood, with a clarity forged in suffering, that no one can take away your mind. Your judgments, your values, your inner responses, these are always yours. His teachings, recorded by his student Arrian in the Discourses and Enchiridion, remain among the most piercing and practical wisdom ever written. Marcus Aurelius stood at the opposite extreme of the social spectrum. He was emperor of Rome, the most powerful man in the known world. He commanded armies, governed millions, held the fate of an empire in his hands, and yet every morning he sat down to write private letters to himself, reminders to stay humble, to remain disciplined, to remember that power and wealth and reputation are ultimately trivial compared to the quality of one's character. His journal, never intended for publication, became Meditations, one of the most beloved books in human history, a testament to the fact that even at the pinnacle of worldly success, the inner battle never stops. Seneca was a playwright, statesman, and one of the sharpest psychological minds of the ancient world. His letters and essays dissect human emotion with surgical precision. Anger, grief, anxiety, the fear of death, the waste of time. His writing crackles with urgency. He knew that life is short and that most people squander it chasing things that don't matter while neglecting the one thing that does, learning how to truly live. What these profoundly different men shared was not an absence of emotion. It was the ability to understand, examine, and direct their emotional experience, to feel fully and still choose wisely, to be moved by life without being swept away by it. The central idea of Stoicism can be stated in a single sentence, drawn from Epictetus. Some things are up to us, and some things are not. That's it. That is the entire foundation. Everything else and every practice, every insight, every technique of Stoic philosophy flows from this single, deceptively simple observation. You cannot control the weather. You cannot control other people's behavior, opinions, or choices. You cannot control the economy, your genetic inheritance, your past, or the inevitable difficulties that life will bring. These things are not up to you, but you can control how you think about them, how you interpret them, what meaning you assign to them, how you respond, what actions you choose to take in light of them. These things are entirely up to you, and in that space, between what happens to you and how you choose to meet it, lies the entirety of human freedom, the entirety of human power, the entirety of what it means to truly live rather than simply react. This is not a philosophy of passivity. The Stoics were warriors, emperors, statesmen, teachers. They engaged fully with life. They fought for justice, built things, led people, loved deeply. But they did all of it from a place of inner stability, an unshakable foundation that external circumstances could disturb, but never destroy. Stoicism is not about becoming emotionless. It is not about suppression, indifference, or cold detachment from the human experience. It is about becoming unshakable, fully alive, fully present, and fully, deliberately, consciously in command of the one thing that was always yours, your mind. You are not your thoughts. Here is a question that might change everything for you. A question so simple it sounds almost trivial, until you sit with it long enough to feel its full weight. Who is thinking your thoughts? Not, what are you thinking? Not, why are you thinking it? But who is doing the thinking? Take a moment and consider this genuinely. Right now, thoughts are arising in your mind. Opinions, reactions, memories, worries, plans. They appear one after another in an apparently endless stream. But if you can observe those thoughts, if you can notice them arising and passing, then you are not identical to those thoughts. You are something else, something that watches. You are the observer, the witness, the awareness behind the content of the mind. This insight, which sounds abstract until it lands with full force, is one of the most liberating discoveries available to a human being, and it sits at the heart of Stoic philosophy. The Stoics practiced what they called prosoche, close attention to oneself, a kind of ongoing self-observation. They were perpetually watching their own minds, not with judgment or self-criticism, but with the calm, steady gaze of a scientist observing a natural phenomenon. When Marcus Aurelius felt anger rising, he didn't say, "I am angry." He noticed, "There is anger here. What is its source? Is it rational? What does wisdom require of me in this moment?" That subtle but radical shift, from identification to observation, is the difference between being enslaved by your mind and being free within it. Modern psychology has independently arrived at the same insight, calling it cognitive diffusion, a technique from acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, that involves creating distance between yourself and your thoughts. Rather than taking thoughts literally and immediately, you learn to see them as mental events, temporary, impermanent, not necessarily true, and certainly not identical to you. Your thoughts will lie to you. This is simply a fact of human psychology. The mind, left to its own devices, is extraordinarily prone to distortion. It catastrophizes the future, projecting disasters that almost never materialize. It ruminates on the past, replaying painful moments on an endless loop that serves no constructive purpose. It generates harsh self-judgments that would make you wince if someone else said them aloud. It creates elaborate narratives of threat, inadequacy, and hopelessness, and then presents them with the authority of absolute truth. But here is what you need to understand. These are just thoughts. They are electrical patterns in a biological organ. They are stories your brain generates, often based on outdated programming, unexamined assumptions, or simple chemical fluctuations. They are not reality, they are not prophecy, they are not you. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The practice begins with something almost embarrassingly simple: awareness. When a thought arises that causes distress, particularly a recurring, intrusive, or self-defeating thought, pause. Notice it. Give it a label. Not "I am a failure," but "there is a thought that says I'm a failure." Not "everything is going wrong," but "there's a catastrophizing thought present right now." You're not arguing with the thought. You're not trying to force it away, which, as anyone who has tried to not think about something knows, is entirely counterproductive. You're simply stepping back, creating the observer's vantage point, moving from inside the thought to watching it. This seemingly small act has enormous consequences. Thoughts that feel overwhelming when you're fully identified with them become manageable, even transparent, when you observe them from a slight distance. The charge diminishes. The tyranny ends. You remember, in a felt sense rather than just intellectually, that you are not your thoughts. Over time, with consistent practice, this changes your entire relationship with your inner life. The thoughts don't necessarily stop coming. The mind will always generate its stream of content, but they lose their power to hijack your behavior, destabilize your mood, and define your reality. You are not the storm. You are the sky through which the storm passes. And the sky, no matter how violent the weather, remains intact. The dichotomy of control. If you had to reduce the entire Stoic philosophy to a single lesson, distill 2,000 years of thought, practice, and wisdom into one principle that you could carry with you everywhere, it would be this: focus only on what you can control. Release everything else. This is the dichotomy of control, and it was articulated most powerfully by Epictetus, a man whose entire life was a testament to its truth. Epictetus was born into slavery. He had no freedom, no rights, no legal personhood. His body belonged to another man. His labor could be taken. His comfort could be destroyed at will. By any conventional measure, he had every reason to be bitter, defeated, and broken. And yet, by every meaningful measure, Epictetus was one of the freest human beings who ever lived, because he understood something that his masters, with all their wealth and power and status, never grasped. The only thing that is truly yours is your mind, your judgments, your intentions, your values, your responses to what happens. These cannot be confiscated. They cannot be bought, sold, stolen, or destroyed by any external force. And if you protect them, guard them, and train them, nothing in the world can truly break you. He articulated the principle at the very opening of his Enchiridion. Some things are in our control and others not. Things in our control are opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion, and, in a word, whatever are our own actions. Things not in our control are body, reputation, command, and, in one word, whatever are not our own actions. This is not resignation. It is not indifference. It is precision, a radical clarity about where your power actually lies. Consider how much of human suffering arises from the violation of this principle. We obsess over what other people think of us, over things not in our control. We rage at traffic, at weather, at the behavior of strangers, over things not in our control. We spiral into anxiety about economic conditions, political outcomes, future disasters that may never materialize, over things not in our control. We lose sleep over our reputation, our social standing, whether people like us or approve of us, over things not in our control. And in doing so, we exhaust ourselves. We pour our finite energy, attention, and emotional resources into a drain that leads nowhere. We feel helpless precisely because we are trying to control the uncontrollable, and inevitably failing. The Stoic prescription is a complete reorientation of effort. You can't control whether your business succeeds, but you can control the preparation, effort, creativity, and persistence you bring to it. You can't control whether someone likes you, but you can control whether you show up with honesty, kindness, and integrity. You can't control illness, but you can control how you care for your body and how you respond to suffering when it comes. You can't control death, but you can control how fully, how deliberately, and how meaningfully you live. This shift doesn't make you passive. It doesn't make you indifferent to outcomes. It makes you strategically powerful, because you stop wasting resources on the uncontrollable and invest them entirely in the controllable. There is a refinement worth noting here. The Stoics also recognized what scholars call a preferred indifferent, things like health, wealth, and reputation that are beyond our full control but are nonetheless reasonable to pursue. The point is not to be indifferent to all outcomes. It's to pursue them without attachment, to do your best and then release the outcome with equanimity, regardless of result. This is what Marcus Aurelius meant when he wrote, "Confine yourself to the present." Not because the future doesn't matter, but because the present is the only place where your agency actually lives. The past is fixed. The future is uncertain. Right here, right now, in this moment. What is up to you? What can you actually do? Do that. Do it fully, wisely, and without reservation, and let everything else be what it is. Emotions are not the enemy. Let's settle something that is commonly misunderstood, and that, if left unclarified, will undermine everything else in this journey. Stoicism does not ask you to stop feeling. It does not demand that you become cold, robotic, or emotionally unavailable. It does not instruct you to bury your grief, perform indifference to suffering, or walk through life with a mask of forced tranquility. These are not Stoic ideals. They are distortions, sometimes well-meaning, sometimes willful, of what the philosophy actually teaches. The Stoics were deeply, richly emotional people. Marcus Aurelius wrote with devastating tenderness about the deaths of friends and children. Seneca's letters pulse with passion, anger at injustice, grief over lost time, profound love for the people in his life. Epictetus spoke about the bonds between human beings with a warmth that contradicts any notion of Stoic coldness. These were not men who had severed themselves from the human capacity to feel. They were men who had learned to feel wisely. To understand the distinction, it helps to know how the Stoics actually categorized emotional experience. They distinguished between two fundamentally different types. The first they called pathe, often translated as passions. These are not emotions in the simple sense, but rather unexamined, unchecked, automatic emotional reactions that overwhelm rational judgment. Rage that makes you say things you regret for years. Jealousy that slowly poisons a relationship. Anxiety that paralyzes you from taking necessary action. Grief that collapses into permanent despair. These are not the emotions themselves. They are emotions that have been allowed to run without any direction, any examination, any wisdom. They have become hijackers of the mind. The second they called eupathei, good emotions. These are emotional states that arise naturally but are accompanied by understanding, context, and rational judgment. The deep satisfaction of meaningful work, genuine affection for other people, a measured, purposeful anger at real injustice that motivates constructive action. Grief that honors loss without becoming permanent identity. These emotions are not obstacles. They are among the richest aspects of being human. The distinction isn't between feeling and not feeling. It's between emotional experience with wisdom and emotional experience without it. Anger is not the enemy. Unexamined, uncontrolled anger that you act on without reflection, that destroys relationships, damages your reputation, and leaves a trail of regret, that is the problem. Fear is not the enemy. Chronic, irrational fear that convinces you the worst is inevitable and keeps you from living fully. That is the problem. Grief is not the enemy. Grief that becomes your permanent identity, that you refuse to process or move through, that gradually replaces your engagement with life. That is the problem. The Stoic practice when an emotion arises is not suppression. It is inquiry. When you feel a powerful emotional response, you pause and ask, what exactly am I feeling right now? What triggered this feeling? What is the underlying belief or judgment that produced it? Is this feeling based on accurate perception of reality, or on distortion, assumption, or exaggeration? Is this emotional response proportionate to the situation? What does wisdom, not impulse, not habit, but genuine wisdom, suggest I do with this feeling? This is not cold logic overriding human experience. This is emotional intelligence operating at its highest level, meeting your inner world with the twin gifts of honesty and compassion, rather than the destructive combination of suppression and reactivity. Emotions carry information. They are signals, not sentences. Fear signals potential danger, real or imagined, and deserves investigation, not immediate obedience. Anger signals a perceived injustice or violation, and deserves examination before action. Sadness signals loss or disconnection, and deserves acknowledgement, expression, and in time, integration. When you learn to listen to your emotions with wisdom, rather than either suppressing them or obeying them blindly, they stop being enemies. They become guides, and your emotional life, far from diminishing, becomes richer, cleaner, and far more trustworthy. The observer mind. Marcus Aurelius wrote about what he called the inner citadel, an impenetrable fortress at the core of every human being that no external force can breach. Not poverty, not illness, not loss, not humiliation, not even death. Whatever the world does to your circumstances, this inner place remains inviolable, intact, yours. The image is powerful, but it raises an obvious question. How do you actually access this place? When emotions are flooding, when anxiety is constricting your chest, when anger is making your hands shake, how do you find the citadel? The answer is through what we might call the observer mind. The observer mind is simply this: the part of your consciousness that can watch your own mental and emotional experience from a slight distance. The part that notices, I am having a strong reaction right now, rather than simply being swept away by that reaction. The part that can say, there is fear here, there is anger here, there is suffering here, acknowledging the reality of the experience while remaining slightly separate from it. This capacity is not mysterious or esoteric. It is a natural human ability, the capacity for metacognition, thinking about your own thinking. Most people have experienced it at some point, a moment of sudden clarity in the middle of an argument where you catch yourself and think, I'm being irrational right now. That catching, that stepping back, that is the observer mind activating. The Stoic practice is to develop this capacity deliberately, consistently, until it becomes a reliable resource rather than an occasional accident. Here is what this looks like in practice. Imagine you receive news that causes immediate emotional distress, a criticism from someone you respect, a piece of bad news about your finances, a conflict with someone you love. The instinctive, untrained response is to be immediately and fully inside the emotion. Your heart rate spikes, your thoughts accelerate. You are in the middle of the storm, and the storm is all there is. The observer mind practice is to pause, even for a moment, and shift your perspective. Instead of I'm devastated, you observe, there is devastation present. My chest is tight, my thoughts are moving very fast. I am having a stress response. You're not denying the experience. You're not pretending it isn't happening. You are simply describing it rather than being it. And that distinction creates a crucial psychological space. Modern neuroscience strongly supports this practice. Research has shown that the act of labeling emotional experience, putting words to what you're feeling, activates the prefrontal cortex, the brain's rational, executive center, and simultaneously reduces activation in the amygdala, the brain's threat detection and emotional reactivity center. In other words, the simple act of observing and naming your emotional state literally changes your brain's response to it. The ancient Stoics, without any knowledge of neuroscience, had discovered the same truth through philosophical reasoning and direct experience. The inner citadel is not a place you build. It is a place you discover. By learning to step back from the contents of your mind and rest in the awareness that observes them. It is always available to you. It doesn't require special conditions. It doesn't require that life be going well, or that you feel calm, or that the challenge in front of you be small. The observer mind can be activated in the middle of a crisis, in the heat of emotion, in the darkest of moments. Because it is not a feeling, it is the capacity to watch feelings, and no external circumstance can take that capacity away. In the middle of whatever storm you face, the Stoic says to themselves, quietly and with absolute conviction, I see what is happening. I will not be consumed by it. I am still here. I am still the one watching. I am still in command. That is the inner citadel. That is your refuge. And it has always been there. Rewriting your inner dialogue. Your most constant companion. The voice that is with you from the moment you wake until the moment you fall asleep. And sometimes in your dreams too. Is not a friend, a partner, a mentor, or a colleague. It is the voice inside your head, and for most people that voice is not particularly kind. It criticizes relentlessly. It catastrophizes the future with confident precision. It replays past failures in high definition. It whispers, "You're not good enough," in quiet moments, and screams it in moments of doubt. It compares you to everyone around you and conducts the comparison in the most unfavorable possible terms. It generates elaborate worst-case scenarios for situations that haven't happened yet. It focuses with remarkable persistence on everything that could go wrong, everything you lack, everything you failed at, and everything that might someday collapse. If a friend spoke to you the way your inner voice speaks to you, you would have ended that friendship years ago. The Stoics understood with remarkable psychological insight for their era that the stories we tell ourselves are not neutral. They are not mere descriptions of reality. They are creators of experience. What you believe about yourself, what you narrate to yourself daily, in the thousands of small moments of inner speech that constitute your mental life, becomes your reality. Not because thoughts are magical or the universe is listening, but because thoughts drive emotions, emotions drive decisions, and decisions accumulated over time create lives. Epictetus stated it directly. Men are disturbed not by things, but by the opinions about things. Your suffering most of the time is not caused directly by what happens to you. It is caused by the interpretation, the story, the meaning, the narrative that you construct about what happens to you. Two people can experience the identical external event and have completely different emotional experiences of it because they construct different internal narratives about what it means. Lose your job. If your inner narrative says, "This is a catastrophe, I'm a failure, I'll never recover, everything I worked for is gone," you will be devastated, possibly for a long time. If your inner narrative says, "This is difficult and scary," it also means the chapter I was in is closed, and something different is possible now. The same objective event produces a very different inner experience. This is not toxic positivity. It is not pretending bad things aren't bad. It is recognizing that between the event and your experience of it, there is always an interpretation, and that interpretation is within your control. The Stoic practice of journaling, which Marcus Aurelius maintained throughout his adult life, producing what became meditations, is one of the most powerful tools for working with inner dialogue. The act of writing externalizes thought, making it visible and examinable rather than merely felt. Thoughts that seem overwhelming inside the mind often reveal themselves on paper to be far more manageable and far more questionable. A simple daily journaling practice for inner dialogue might look like this. In the evening, take 10 minutes to review the day. Ask yourself, what were the dominant narratives running in my mind today? Were they accurate? Were they helpful? Were they things I would endorse if I examined them clearly? When you find a destructive narrative, "I'm not capable enough. Things always go wrong for me. I don't deserve good things." Don't simply try to replace it with the opposite. Question it. Examine the evidence. Ask, is this actually true? What evidence supports it? What evidence contradicts it? What would a wise, compassionate observer say about this situation? Over time, this practice develops a kind of inner editor, a part of you that notices when the inner voice is being unreasonably harsh, catastrophic, or distorted, and gently but firmly redirects it toward something more accurate and more constructive. The inner dialogue is not fixed by genetics or history or personality. It is a habit, and like all habits, it can be changed. With intention, consistency, and the Stoic commitment to examining your own mind honestly, the voice inside your head can become one of your greatest allies rather than your most persistent tormentor. This is among the most important work you will ever do. How to respond, not react. There is an insight associated with Viktor Frankl, echoed throughout Stoic philosophy, confirmed by modern neuroscience, that contains within it an entire philosophy of human freedom. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our freedom and our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our happiness. Read that again. Let it settle. Between what happens to you and what you do about it, there is a space, a moment of pure possibility, a fraction of a second or longer if you train it, in which you are not yet determined, in which you are still free to choose. Most people live their entire lives without accessing that space. Someone criticizes them. They immediately defend or attack. A plan falls apart. They immediately panic or blame. A difficult emotion arises. They immediately act it out, speak it out, or suppress it entirely. The stimulus lands, and the response fires with the automaticity of a reflex. The space between them is either non-existent or so narrow as to be functionally irrelevant. This is reactivity. And while it is completely normal, it is in many ways the default mode of untrained human psychology. It is also among the most significant sources of unnecessary suffering, damaged relationships, and regretted decisions in human life. A reaction is automatic. It is the nervous system doing what it was conditioned to do. Patterns of response built through years of experience, many of them formed in childhood when options were limited and emotions were overwhelming. Reactions happen quickly, without consultation with your values or your wisdom. They feel right in the moment, often intensely so, and they frequently produce consequences you spend a long time cleaning up afterward. A response is chosen. It is the product of a person who has paused, assessed the situation with some degree of clarity, consulted their values, and decided, consciously, deliberately, how they want to act. A response may feel less immediately satisfying than a reaction. It requires more effort, but it aligns with who you actually want to be, and it produces outcomes you can live with. The Stoics called the practice of self-monitoring prosotio, constant attention to oneself, a state of alert inner watchfulness. The Stoic was always, at some level, observing their own inner state, tracking the emotional temperature, noticing when reactivity was beginning to build, maintaining the capacity to pause. In practice, the foundational tool for developing this capacity is extraordinarily simple: the deliberate pause. When you feel a reaction rising, when you notice the first signals of emotional activation, whether it's the tightening of your chest, the quickening of your thoughts, the impulse to speak before you've thought, stop. Breathe. Take one slow, deliberate breath. Even a single second of intentional pause changes the neurological equation. It activates the prefrontal cortex. It creates the space Frankl described. It returns you to the position of chooser rather than reactor. Then in that space, ask yourself a simple question. What is the wisest response here? Not the most emotionally satisfying response. Not the response that would feel best right now. Not the response that would punish the other person most effectively, or make you look strongest or feel most justified. The wisest response, the one that reflects your values, serves the actual situation, and that you will be at peace with tomorrow. This is not weakness. It requires far more strength to pause in the heat of emotion than to lash out. Anyone can react. It costs nothing. But choosing your response in the midst of strong emotion, that requires genuine power, the power that Stoicism exists to develop. Begin practicing the pause in small moments, in traffic, in minor disagreements, when technology frustrates you, when plans change unexpectedly. Train the pause in the small moments so that when the great challenges arrive, the real provocations, the genuine crises, the moments that truly test you, the pause is already a deeply ingrained habit, a reflex but one built by choice, because in the end your character is not revealed in your extraordinary moments. It is built in your ordinary ones. Every time you pause instead of react, you are reinforcing the neural pathways of wisdom. You are becoming, one moment at a time, the person you want to be. Discipline is freedom. Here is a paradox that stops most people in their tracks. True freedom is not the absence of constraints. True freedom is the mastery of yourself. This sounds backwards from the way most people think about freedom. We tend to understand freedom as the ability to do whatever we want, whenever we want, without restriction. Freedom from obligation, freedom from discomfort, freedom from the demands of others, the ability to follow every impulse, satisfy every appetite, and avoid every difficulty. But the Stoics saw this vision of freedom for exactly what it is. Not freedom at all, but slavery. Slavery to your appetites, your impulses, your moods, and your fears. A person who must eat whatever they crave is controlled by appetite. A person who must say whatever comes to mind is controlled by impulse. A person who cannot tolerate discomfort is controlled by the fear of it. A person who cannot delay gratification is controlled by the immediate and blinded to the important. Real freedom, the kind Marcus Aurelius wrote about from the throne of an empire, the kind Epictetus embodied in the chains of slavery, is freedom from being governed by your lower nature. Freedom to act in accordance with your values even when your impulses point elsewhere. Freedom to choose your response even when every reflex is pushing you toward reaction. Freedom to remain yourself, your best, most deliberate, most conscious self, regardless of what the world throws at you. And the path to that freedom is discipline. Epictetus stated it without apology. No man is free who is not master of himself. This is the foundation of Stoic practice. Self-mastery is not built through grand gestures or occasional feats of willpower. It is built through the small, unglamorous, uncelebrated choices made every single day. The decisions that no one sees and that seem individually, entirely inconsequential. Waking when you said you would. Honoring the commitment you made to yourself. Finishing what you started even when the initial enthusiasm has faded. Holding your tongue in a moment when speaking would feel satisfying, but would ultimately be destructive. Choosing the harder, right over the easier wrong. Each of these moments is a vote for the person you are becoming. And votes accumulate. The Stoics also practiced something that sounds extreme to modern ears, but was central to their philosophy: voluntary discomfort. Deliberately choosing difficulty, not because it was necessary, but because they refused to become dependent on comfort. They would eat simply when they could eat elaborately. They would sleep on hard surfaces occasionally. They would practice going without things they enjoyed, not as punishment but as training. The logic is simple and profound. If you only function well under comfortable conditions, then comfort has become a requirement. You are dependent on it. Remove it, and you are destabilized. But if you have deliberately practiced operating in discomfort, if you have repeatedly demonstrated to yourself that you can handle difficulty, that deprivation doesn't break you, that inconvenience doesn't unravel you, then comfort becomes a bonus rather than a necessity. And nothing that life can take from you can fundamentally undermine your functioning. This is the psychological foundation of genuine resilience. The paradox resolves itself once you live it. The more you discipline yourself, the freer you become. Not freer in the sense of fewer responsibilities or easier circumstances. Freer in the sense that matters. Free from being controlled by appetite, impulse, fear, and mood. Free to be the person you actually choose to be, in any circumstance, under any conditions. Discipline is not a cage. Discipline is not punishment. Discipline is not the enemy of joy or spontaneity or richness of life. Discipline is the key that opens the only door that was ever worth opening. The door to your own authentic freedom. The power of acceptance. There is a Latin phrase at the heart of Stoic philosophy, and at the heart of genuine psychological freedom, that has the power to completely transform your relationship with your own life. Amor fati, love of fate. Not tolerance of what happens, not grudging acceptance of what cannot be changed, not the weary resignation of someone who has given up fighting, but something far more radical and far more powerful. An active, fierce, wholehearted love for everything that occurs, including the hard things, including the losses, including the failures and the disappointments and the things that break your heart, especially those. The phrase was coined by Nietzsche, but the spirit was pure Stoicism, and its expression in the ancient texts is unmistakable. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together, and do so with all your heart." And Epictetus offered perhaps the clearest articulation of the principle. Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life. This is a genuinely difficult teaching. It cuts against everything our psychology instinctively wants to do when life goes wrong. When we lose something precious, Our instinct is to rage against the loss. When circumstances disappoint us, our instinct is to protest, to demand, to insist that things should be different. When pain arrives, our instinct is to flee from it, to deny it, to find someone or something to blame for it. And all of this resistance, while completely natural, is, according to the Stoics, a primary source of unnecessary suffering. The distinction the Stoics make is crucial. Acceptance is not passivity. It is not giving up, not surrendering, not abandoning effort or hope. You can simultaneously accept the reality of a difficult situation and work with everything you have to improve it. What changes is not the level of your effort, but the relationship you have with the outcome. You do your best, fully, passionately, without holding back, and then you make peace with whatever results from that effort. Amor fati goes further than simple acceptance. It asks not merely that you tolerate what happens, but that you find, or create, something to genuinely value in it. That you treat everything that happens to you, including suffering, as material for growth. This is not self-deception. It is not telling yourself that loss isn't loss, or that failure isn't failure, or that pain isn't pain. It is the recognition that every experience, without exception, contains within it something that can be used, something that can teach, strengthen, clarify, deepen, or expand you. The question is not whether the experience is good or bad. The question is, what will you do with it? Marcus Aurelius faced things in his life that would have broken most people. He lost children. He governed through a devastating plague that killed millions. He dealt with military campaigns that seemed endless, political betrayals that cut deep, the grinding weight of responsibilities that never let up. And throughout all of it, he returned, in his private writings over and over, to a single orientation. This is what I have been given. What does wisdom ask of me now? Not, why is this happening to me? A question that has no useful answer and generates only bitterness. But what does this moment require of me? What can I do with what I've been given? Amor fati is not a passive surrender to fate. It is the ultimate act of psychological power, the decision to want what is, not as the abandonment of will, but as its highest expression. The decision to bring your full self to the life you actually have, rather than withholding your engagement until the life you wished for finally arrives. The obstacle is the way. The difficulty is the teacher. The loss is, in ways that may take time to see clearly, also a door. Love it. All of it. Every difficult, imperfect, unexpected, unasked for piece of it. This is your life. It is the only one you have. And it is, in the end, exactly enough. Daily Stoic practices for emotional mastery. Philosophy without practice is decoration. The Stoics understood this from the beginning. They were not armchair theorists constructing intellectual systems for the entertainment of other intellectuals. They were practitioners. Their philosophy was a training regimen, a set of daily disciplines applied every morning, every evening, every moment of challenge or difficulty. The philosophy existed to be lived, not merely understood. And the gap between understanding Stoic ideas and actually embodying them is crossed through one thing only: consistent, deliberate practice. Here are the core Stoic practices for building genuine emotional mastery, not as occasional techniques to deploy in crisis, but as daily habits that gradually transform the way your mind works. Practice 1. Morning preparation, premeditatio malorum. Before the day begins, before you check your phone, before you engage with the demands and distractions of the world, take 5 to 10 minutes in deliberate mental preparation. The practice is called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity. It sounds grim, but its effect is the opposite. You sit quietly and consider, what challenges might I face today? What difficulties, frustrations, or provocations might arise? You don't dwell on them with anxiety. You prepare for them with clarity. You ask, if that happens, how do I want to respond? What does the person I'm trying to become do in that situation? This practice dissolves one of the great sources of emotional reactivity: the illusion that life will be smooth. When we expect smoothness and encounter difficulty, the difficulty feels like a violation, something wrong, something that shouldn't be happening. When we have prepared ourselves mentally for the full range of what the day might bring, difficulty arrives not as a shock, but as something anticipated, something you have already, at least mentally, prepared to meet. Marcus Aurelius began many of his journal entries with this practice, reminding himself each morning that he would encounter difficult people, frustrating circumstances, and challenges to his patience and wisdom. Not to make himself miserable, but to make himself ready. Practice 2. Evening Reflection. The Stoic Journal. At the end of each day, before sleep, take 10 to 15 minutes for honest self-examination. Seneca described this practice in his letters. He reviewed each day's events with the thoroughness of a judge examining a case, but a judge who seeks understanding, not punishment. 3 simple questions structure the reflection. What did I do well today? Where did I embody the values I'm committed to? Where did I fall short? Where did I react when I could have responded, or act from impulse when wisdom was available? What will I do differently tomorrow? The purpose is not self-flagellation. Harsh self-criticism is no more useful than harsh self-criticism from anyone else. It generates shame, not growth. The purpose is honest, compassionate self-knowledge, seeing yourself clearly, tracking your progress, identifying the patterns that keep recurring so that you can address them deliberately. Over time, this practice builds a quality the Stoics prized above almost everything else: sophrosine, soundness of mind, self-knowledge, the ability to see yourself clearly and without illusion. And from clear self-knowledge, genuine improvement becomes possible. Practice 3. The view from above. When you are caught in a difficult situation, when a problem looms large, when an emotion feels overwhelming, when a conflict seems impossibly significant, deliberately widen your perspective. Marcus Aurelius practiced what he called the view from above, mentally stepping back until you can see your situation in a larger context. Begin with your immediate circumstances. Then zoom out to your neighborhood, your city, your country, the planet, humanity's presence on it, a thin film of life on a small rock orbiting an average star in one of billions of galaxies, the span of cosmic time against which the entirety of human history is less than a blink. This practice doesn't trivialize your problems. It proportions them. The conflict that feels earth-shattering in close-up looks rather different from the vantage point of 100 years hence, or 1,000. Most of what consumes us with urgency will be completely irrelevant in a decade. Many of the things we believe we cannot survive, we will not only survive but eventually be grateful for. The view from above doesn't solve problems. It restores perspective. And perspective is the beginning of wisdom. Practice 4. Negative visualization, memento mori. Briefly, not obsessively, but deliberately, contemplate the impermanence of what you love. Consider that the people in your life will not be there forever, that your health is not guaranteed, that the circumstances you enjoy could change, that time is passing. The Stoic practice of memento mori, remember that you will die, is not morbidity. It is a tool for radical gratitude. We tend to appreciate things most acutely when we are about to lose them or have just lost them. The Stoic insight is that we can access that appreciation now, without the loss, by deliberately contemplating impermanence. When you fully grasp, not just intellectually but in your gut, that this moment will pass, that the people you love are temporary, that this season of your life will not last, ordinary moments become extraordinary. The ordinary meal with people you care about, the unremarkable Tuesday afternoon, the fact that you are alive and capable of experience at all. Memento mori is not about focusing on death. It is about focusing on life, with the full intensity that awareness of its brevity and impermanence makes possible. Practice 5. Voluntary discomfort. Once a week, deliberately choose something uncomfortable. Skip a meal and sit with the discomfort of hunger without immediately resolving it. Take a cold shower instead of a warm one. Give up something you enjoy for a day. Do the physical thing you've been avoiding. Have the difficult conversation you've been postponing. The purpose is not masochism. It is training, demonstrating to yourself, through repeated experience, that you can handle discomfort without being destabilized by it. That your well-being does not depend on every condition being favorable. That you are capable of functioning, and functioning well, even when things are hard. Every time you voluntarily choose discomfort and come through it intact, you build evidence for a belief that is foundational to Stoic resilience. I can handle this. Whatever this is, I can handle it. These 5 practices, maintained with consistency and genuine intention, will do more to transform your emotional life than any single insight or dramatic experience. They work not because they are dramatic, but because they are cumulative, each day's practice adding to the one before, gradually reshaping the habits of your mind until Stoic equanimity becomes not an occasional achievement, but your default way of being. Philosophy lived is philosophy that changes you. Start today. Start small. Start with one practice. And keep going. When the mind attacks, handling crisis moments. You have studied the philosophy. You have practiced the morning meditation. You have journaled in the evenings. You have trained the pause, cultivated the observer mind, and worked consistently on your inner dialogue. And then life arrives with something real, not a minor frustration, not a daily inconvenience that tests your patience, but something that strikes at the foundations, a devastating loss, a profound betrayal, a failure that dismantles something you built with years of effort, a crisis of health or relationship or meaning that takes the ground out from under you completely. Anxiety floods your system. Thoughts spiral with terrifying speed. The mind, rather than being your ally, seems to have turned against you, generating fear faster than you can process it, catastrophizing with relentless efficiency, producing suffering that feels not like a wave to ride but like a tide that might never go out. What does Stoic philosophy say in these moments? Not the comfortable moments, not the manageable challenges, but the genuine crises that test everything you believe about yourself? First, honor the reality of what you're experiencing. The Stoics were not in denial. They did not practice emotional bypass, the spiritually sophisticated-sounding habit of moving too quickly past genuine pain in the name of philosophy or positive thinking. Marcus Aurelius wrote openly about grief. Seneca described the experience of anxiety and fear with precise, unsanitized honesty. Epictetus never pretended that slavery was fine or that suffering didn't hurt. If you are in genuine pain, acknowledge it. Name it. Don't perform equanimity you don't feel. Don't rush past the experience to get to the resolution. The Stoic practice is not about bypassing human experience. It is about meeting it with wisdom. And wisdom begins with honesty. Second, return to the dichotomy. When the emotional storm is at its most intense, the mind tends to expand the problem until it fills the entire field of consciousness. Everything feels equally urgent, equally unresolvable, equally threatening. This is the psychological phenomenon of cognitive flooding, and it is not an accurate picture of reality. In the midst of the storm, return to the foundational Stoic question. Right now, in this moment, what is actually within my control? Not everything. In a genuine crisis, much may not be, but something always is. Your breath, your next decision, the words you choose, the action you take in the next hour. Find the controllable. It may be very small. That's fine. Anchor to it. Act from it. A single concrete action taken from a place of clarity, however small, begins to shift the psychological state from helpless victim to active agent. Third, use the pause as a lifeline. In crisis, every instinct pushes toward immediate action. Fix it, flee it, fight it, resolve it right now. The nervous system is activated, urgency is high, the pressure to do something is enormous. Resist this pressure. Not forever, but for long enough. Take a breath. Take several. Allow the initial flood of neurological activation to begin to settle before you make significant decisions or take significant actions. Decisions made at the height of emotional flooding are almost always worse than decisions made after even a brief period of deliberate calm. The pause is not inaction. It is the most important action available to you in that moment. Fourth, invoke impermanence. The Stoics returned repeatedly to the simple, factual observation that everything passes. Every state, every circumstance, every experience, however intense, however seemingly permanent, exists in time. It has a beginning. It has, inevitably, an end. This is not dismissiveness toward your suffering. It is not an instruction to minimize what you're going through. It is an anchor to reality when the mind is trying to convince you that the present moment's pain is both absolute and permanent. Neither is true. You have survived every difficult moment of your life to this point. The survival rate for your bad days is currently 100%. This too, whatever this is, will pass. Hold that truth. Fifth, ask the Stoic question, not, "Why is this happening to me?" A question that tends to generate only bitterness, blame, or existential despair, and which has no answer that will help you. But given that this is happening, given that this is the reality I'm in, who do I want to be right now? How do I want to show up? What does the person I'm trying to become do in this situation? This is not the question of someone in denial. It is the question of someone who has accepted reality and is now exercising the one freedom that cannot be taken away, the freedom to choose their response. The mind will attack. Life will bring moments that shake everything. The Stoic philosophy does not protect you from difficulty. Nothing does. What it gives you is something far more valuable, a set of principles and practices that make you capable of meeting difficulty without being destroyed by it. The Stoics did not promise that the storm would not come. They promised that you could become the kind of person who weathers it. And that promise, forged in the lives of former slaves and philosopher emperors, has been kept for 2,000 years. You are always in control. We began with a battlefield. A mind running before the alarm stops ringing. Thoughts arising unbidden. Emotions pulling in directions not consciously chosen. The chaotic, relentless, exhausting experience of being human in a world that never stops demanding your reaction. And the question that runs underneath all of it. The question that this entire journey has been moving toward. Who is actually in charge here? By now, after 13 chapters of philosophy, practice, reflection, and honest examination, you know the answer. Not as an intellectual concept, but as something you have begun to feel in your body, in your decisions, in the quality of your inner life. You are in charge. You are always in charge. Not because life will become easy. The difficulties will continue. Loss will come. Failure will visit. People will disappoint you and circumstances will frustrate you and the world will, at times, seem indifferent to everything you hope for. The Stoics lived through all of this. They faced wars and plagues and betrayals and grief on scales most of us will never encounter. They did not promise that the outer world would cooperate with your wishes. What they promised, and what the evidence of their lives demonstrated, is that the inner world is always under your governance. Not perfectly, not automatically, not without effort and practice and occasional failure, but fundamentally, irreducibly, in the ways that most deeply matter. You have always been the one in charge of your own mind. The power to observe a thought without becoming it, to feel an emotion without being swept away by it, to pause in the space between stimulus and response and choose deliberately who you want to be, to accept what cannot be changed and pour your full, undivided energy into what can, to step back in any moment from the storm of the mind and rest in the awareness that has never been and can never be taken from you. That power has always been yours. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of the most powerful civilization the Western world had ever known, carrying burdens that would have crushed almost anyone, facing the full complexity and suffering of a human life at its most demanding, sat down every morning and wrote to himself about one thing, returned to it over and over, from every angle, through every difficulty. Go inward. Master yourself. That is enough. That is everything. The Stoic path is not a destination you arrive at. There is no final achievement. No moment of perfect enlightenment after which the work is done. It is a practice, daily, lifelong, perpetually renewed. Some days you will inhabit the inner citadel with ease, moving through difficulty with grace and clarity. Other days the storm will pull you under, the reactions will fire before the pause can intervene, the inner dialogue will turn harsh, and the observer mind will be nowhere to be found. Both of these are part of the path. What matters, the only thing that matters, is that you return, that you remember, that after being pulled off course by the inevitable currents of a fully human life, you orient yourself again toward the inner compass of your values, your wisdom, and your will. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that watches them arise and pass. You are not your emotions. You are the consciousness that feels them without being defined by them. You are not your circumstances. You are the person who meets circumstances with intention, with courage, with the full weight of your conscious choice. You are, in the deepest and most important sense, free. Not because the chains of life have been removed, but because you have discovered, as Epictetus discovered in literal chains, as Marcus Aurelius discovered beneath the crushing weight of an empire, as Seneca discovered in exile and in proximity to a tyrant's power, that freedom was never about what surrounds you. It was always about what's within you. The war inside your head has not ended. It never entirely ends. But you are no longer fighting it unconsciously, reactively, from a place of powerlessness. You are fighting it with philosophy, with practice, with the accumulated wisdom of 2,000 years of human beings who faced the same battle and found their way through. You are fighting it awake, and that changes everything. You are always in control. Now live like it, every single day.